Sociologist Brené Brown's TED Talk on vulnerability has more than 12 million views. A big reason that it's so popular is the truth that as much as we fight it, we long for the freedom to admit that we are broken. We don't realize our need to admit it, but it's true that everyone needs to, especially those of us who realize it the least. So Brown helps us realize that we're not alone in this. She uses some interesting ideas. One of them is that she says that we all have this idea of those people, right? Like the people that we want to talk about not being like. And then she flips this idea and says that we are those people. I mean, I think she's absolutely right. Here's what that looks like for us. I think that the truth is that most of us are one bad grade, one breakup, one drug-addicted confession, one mental health diagnosis, one serious illness, and one night of drinking or one night of sex from being those people. The ones that we don't trust, the ones that we feel bad for, or the ones that our parents don't want us to hang out with. The ones that bad things happen to, the ones that people are ashamed of, the ones that we don't even want to associate with. In our world, there are too many voices telling us to keep up our appearances, to have good social status, because if we don't, our life will just fall apart. There are too many voices telling us to entertain ourselves, that if we don't think bad thoughts, that the bad stuff will somehow just kind of trickle away. And that's what we all have become masters of illusion. We're experts of covering pain, abusers of medication, strong followers of fads, and all too familiar with the feeling of loneliness. So, what's our solution? Well, we often find ourselves thinking that the only solution for being broken is fighting the brokenness and just accepting it. And we live in our brokenness. We see an incredible story of this actually taking place in the Bible. We get an inside scoop on a conversation in John chapter 4 where Jesus is actually talking with a lady who is actively fighting against being known. She's set in on her idea that her sin identifies her, that it's just who she is. Her brokenness is her identity. And let's check out exactly how she fights from being known. So before we actually dive in on this conversation, we can draw some conclusions as to who this lady is. We know that since it's lunchtime in the story, she's clearly out in the middle of the day, and that it's weird because it's the hottest part of the day to be doing one of the hardest jobs of her day. So in addition to that, we know that culturally women would gather first thing in the morning at the well to draw their water for the day. And why would this lady be out avoiding the morning? Who wouldn't want to just go meet up with their friends and talk about what's going on at home or what they heard about from around the town from the day before? Could it be that this character knew exactly what she was doing? She was pulling away from that circle, that she knew that if she showed up, people would know who she was and therefore not accept her. And this is where we first see the fight of not being known, the desire to hide in the shadows, to be okay with her hurt. And that's exactly where we are. So I can't help but think, can you see yourself in this Samaritan woman? What are the ways that you intentionally go about your day dodging the truth? We can be so creative in how we avoid having real conversations. We build up and put up walls all around us to block people out. As a culture, we build higher fences and we stay in our houses. We don't hang out with our neighbors, but more realistically for you and I, we block or unfollow people on social media that we don't want to follow. Or better yet, we don't even want to see what they're up to, right? We don't want to know what's going on in their life. I don't even have to tell you this, but think about the things that you post. There's so many filters and edits that we add to our pictures that we make even the good parts of our life seem even better than they really are. The truth is that we are in many ways just like this woman. We are actively avoiding the reality of being known. So let's dive into this conversation and see what we can learn from her, okay? So when Jesus shows up, this is awesome. He doesn't even hesitate to dive right in. I personally think it's hilarious. So he walks up to this lady, and without saying even, hey, or what's up, no small talk at all, he simply says, hey, give me a drink. The command leads her to lash out to Jesus, telling her, she starts explaining that for all the cultural reasons in their background, he shouldn't even be talking to her. That as a Samaritan woman, a Jewish man should not even approach her. How many times do we do the same thing? Culturally, it's completely abnormal. At all, not the norm to have random people come up to you and start talking to you. Now, don't get too hung up on this cultural background here. The reality is that she knew who she was. and what her reputation was. She wanted nothing more for this man to stop talking to her. She didn't want to be known. Students, we do this. Like, we know the moment that people approach us that we are susceptible to being known. Because if people ask questions that I just can't easily brush off, the only option I have is to actually talk about how I'm really feeling or how I'm really doing. Here's a challenge for you. I want you to think about this. What would it look like for you to not be able to simply reply to the question, "How was your day?" with the one word that we always use? It's the word, you know it. What if we couldn't use the word fine? Like, stop making up reasons for people to be able to press into your life. As the conversation continues, we jump back in with Jesus here, and he changes his tone from from asking for a drink to explaining to the woman that if she truly knew who he was, then she would not just give him a drink, but she wouldn't just do what he originally asked, but she would be asking him for a drink. Jesus is offering the woman more than just an earthly drink of water, but instead his offer is to satisfy the deepest desire of her heart, and that is to be known. So, take a step back with me for a second. Knowing what we know about who Jesus is, him being God's son, but also talking with this lady at the same time, tells us that he cares for her. So when we look back in this conversation, we can understand that he is offering true life. But here again, we see her fight. She tries to outsmart Jesus and tells him that it's not even possible for him to offer water since he has nothing to even dip from the well with. And on top of that, she runs through the fact that people for generations have been drinking from this well. So how on earth could Jesus somehow pull up some water that could magically make her not thirsty again? This is the same place that people for generations have been drinking from. Jesus, you can't do this. That's exactly what she's saying. And so looking at it from our perspective, you can see how she's simply missing the point. Clearly, Jesus isn't talking about physical water that she could drink. No, he is talking about a true life change, what she thirsts for or is chasing after that is not satisfying in her life. Jesus is so patient, and with love, he offers what no one else or nothing else can. But again, her pushback is saying this. In her lack of trust in Jesus, she is simply saying that, Jesus, you are not able. How many times, students, have you felt like that? The feeling that maybe I'm too far gone, that I have too much junk in my life, or no one can love me because of that. I cannot be accepted. If they were to really know who I was, then there would be no place for me. I see it all too often. I see it because we cling on to the ideas and they crumble us. So instead of admitting that we're fearful, that we live in fear, I don't want to because people might think that I'm weak. Or tell them that I'm full of anxiety some days, like I can't even get out of bed. But I don't want to let people know that because I think that if they knew that, then they wouldn't love me. Students, I'm pleading with you. Come to taste what Jesus has to offer. It is the life that will never run dry. It's the water that will truly never cause you to thirst again. And He's offered it to you. How do I know this? Because that's exactly what Jesus does here in our story. You see, as you keep reading in this conversation, the woman, she finally gives in, and she accepts Jesus' offer of living water. And when she does, He does the unthinkable. Without her confessing it all or Him talking with anybody else in the town who knew her, He called her out on her sin. He said to her, "Go and get your husband." She replied, "I don't have one." And Jesus said, "I know. Because the man that you're living with, he's not your husband. And in fact, you've had 5 husbands." Are you kidding me? Just take that in for a second. Like, talk about a mess. I mean that in the nicest way, but she is that person that I talked about at the beginning. She's one of those people. There's no doubt that this lady is full of sin and mess. But guess what? Jesus doesn't run. He doesn't call her out in order to shame her. No, He calls her out in her sin in love. Why? Because He can do only what He can do, and that is fully love us. Students, don't miss that. Jesus wanted to make sure that this woman was fully understood, that what He was doing, that He knew everything about her life. He knew all of her struggles, all of her sins, but yet on top of that, He fully loved and accepted her. She was fully known and fully loved by Jesus. This is our focus for the night. My biggest hope for you I hope that each and every one of you here in small group will get to that point of understanding that this is worth the fight. Sure, just like we see in our conversation, it is a fight. We naturally fight against being known, but I promise you it's worth it to turn our efforts in the other direction. So instead of fighting against being known, let this be a place where you can fight to be known. Just like in any fighting, I promise you there will be some pain. Because when you fight for vulnerability to be truly known, you will find that there are some painful moments as you bear one another's weights. Sin is not easy. It's not fun. So no matter if it's the confession of your own sin that brings pain or walking with someone in your small group through theirs in love, you will experience pain. And that's a promise. But here's why it's worth it. I believe that in vulnerability, in this vulnerability that we experience together, we find the birthplace of what Jesus has to offer. In Jesus, we see the fullness of true joy, true peace, and true comfort. That in Jesus, we see the ultimate fight that has already been won. The fight for your life, that He came to live the life that you and I could not live on our own. The fight through the death on the cross that we all deserve because of our sin. And then the ultimate defeating of the grave that Jesus would take for all of us. Jesus fought that fight. My hope is that we will live into the offer that Jesus has for us. That we will be people who don't buy into the lie that our only option is to live into our brokenness, but instead live into the life fighting to be fully known and fully loved.